Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Toys R Us. Well, it's not really Toys R Us, is it? This is still sort of one of our guy things that we could talk about. If you have an RV, you're probably not prone to problems. And the worst of them are electrical problems, and we had a doozy. This is our Forest River. It's a 2017 F312BHX. That is going to be a bunkhouse model. And we're going to see if we can work through this problem and I can pass along some information to help you all out. Stick around. Well, we're starting at the front because this landing gear was the first thing to start giving us problems, and it was almost from day one. We would have issues, especially when raising the front of the trailer for hookups. We had something like a breaker tripping, and there's your clue. It would come back on, but then after the first time it went off, it would more frequently kick over or go off. So you'd have about 2 seconds of wind up, and then it'd quit. And then 2 more seconds of wind up, and it quit. Now, this progressively seemed like it was getting a little worse, but just barely. And then, after a few weeks of that, or a few months of that, and our dealership not really being able to trace the problem down, they weren't really even interested in the problem. They just thought it was normal. Oh, well, you have a low battery or something like that. But then we went out camping after just picking it up from the dealership, and then we really started having problems. The landing gear started having the problem. Then we started having problems with this rear stabilizer. And we also started having problems with the awning. And then, last but not least, we started having a problem with the main slide. That reset issue became more frequent, and then it would only work about every 24 hours, about once a day. And then it only worked for a few seconds, and once it clicked off, it wouldn't work no more. So it really got to be an issue, especially since we had to manually crank everything in to hook up and come home. So I started tracing the problem down. Now, stick with us, and we'll walk you through the progress of what happened. All right, so now we're inside. Now remember, we had several failed systems. We had our front landing gear, our rear stabilizers, our awning, and our slides were not working. We had to manually put them in so that we could come home, get home from our camping trip. So I looked at the dealership to get help. I didn't want to haul this thing all the way back up to Vegas just to have it sit there for months and then still not know what was going on. I kind of started to lose my faith in them, but they did agree to guide me through a couple of things. Now, they thought it was probably a breaker switch, a weak breaker or something like that, and wanted me to look in the front, and I really didn't see a breaker up there. What I saw was what looked like a power distribution system. Now, it did later turn out to be breakers, so I'll give them those kudos. But since this component right here was not installed properly, it was just thrown in a drawer cubby after it was wired up. Actually, in back of the drawer. This is under the refrigerator, and there's a drawer here. You pull out the drawer, and in back is opened up. There's some of the other outside RV components. And this thing was just thrown in there. It wasn't screwed down or nothing, even though there's places to screw it down. So I thought it should have been fastened to a bulkhead or the back of that drawer box or something, so that it wasn't bouncing around. So I figured maybe this thing was bad. Now, what it is the receiver for the remote. So any of you guys that have RVs that are late model, a lot of them come with remotes so that you can remotely control all the systems that I was having problems with. So there's the clue, is that this receiver, this system, was controlling everything that I was having a problem with. It's the one thing they all had in common. So I was kind of curious about this Lippert system. This is the receiver for the remote again. I'll throw up a picture of the wiring diagram for you people that think you might be having problems with it, or, you know, need to tinker with this or whatever. I think later I'm going to do an entire video on programming and wiring this system. So I proceeded along this line, and the direction I got from the dealership was that, well, even if this board was bad, the manual switches should still work. This was a problem, because that wasn't true at all, because my manual switches didn't work, nor did my remote on any of the trouble systems. Well, the reason for that is that for safety reasons, this receiver is set up to supply power to the switches. The reason for this is that if you were to push a button on the remote and use one of the manual panel switches at the same time, you could cause a short. That's no bueno. So what happens when you push a button on the remote, it disconnects power to one of the any of the manual switches, to all of them, all of them, until you let off the button on the remote. Once it's not receiving a signal from the remote anymore, it turns on the power to the switches about 8 seconds later, and you can operate the switches from the manual panel again. So that made sense to me. Everything that I was having problems with, whether it was a manual switch or the remote or a component, was all going through this unit. So I kind of suspected it was maybe this. Well, it kind of was, kind of wasn't. They were right at the dealership, and I was right at the dealership. So let me come in here a little bit closer and show you. I'm not going to talk about any of these, because these are all the functions, and these over here are functions. I'm not using two of them over here, just one of them over here. But over here, this is all the important wiring. You have a ground and a battery cable right here, this first white and red one. The next three wires are output power to the switches. They're positive connections that go power out to the switches. And then the last wire, the white one here, is a ground for the switches. So let me go over that again. You have the ground and the battery input power for this unit. Then you have 3 power output for switches, and then a ground for all of the switches. So that's what happens is that when you push a button to send power to one of these components, to function it disconnects the manual switch through one of these outputs here. So all of these outputs go out as soon as you push a button. About 8 seconds later, they come back on. So as I progressed further, what I noticed is that no matter what was happening, whether I pushed a button on the remote or I pushed a button on the panel or one of the landing gear or the stabilizers outside switches, this would still click off. So I'm like, wait a minute, I push a switch, then it clicks power off to the switch. Do I got a short somewhere or something? Well, we're getting closer. Like I said, they were right, and so was I. We'll be right back. All right, everyone, we're back. This is under the battery compartment, and this will be similar for most RVs. But somewhere you're going to have a power distribution system, and it usually looks like a relay. And everything they sent me looked like just a single relay or something like a relay. On our late model RV, and this again is a 2017 Forest River Wildcat Maxx, there's actually a big power distribution system with multiple relays. And it was behind this protective rubber cover that keeps anything from getting shorted. It's screwed down with a couple of 3/8 inch self-tapping sheet metal screws to the bulkhead inside the battery compartment. So we're going to take that off there. We'll be right back so you can have a look at that. All right, now here's the power distribution node system that I'm talking about. I'm going to zoom in just a little here so you can see this broken one. Let me get my finger in there, right here. It's broken there. And it wasn't quite this broken, but this is where that one wire that controls everything went to. And what happened was it got torqued down too tight and it messed up whatever was inside of here. Because I noticed that what was happening is it seemed to have power. But whenever you hit the switch, and what I was using is the landing gear here, it pulled so much amperage that it tripped this breaker. But then it would immediately work again as soon as you let off the button. So when it was low amperage like the lights, the LED lights, then it worked fine. But as soon as you tried to operate a motor, it didn't work at all. Now, according to my RV dealership, which I'm having less and less faith in, I should be able to replace that breaker. It's supposed to be a breaker. But I don't know if I have to take everything off here or just the 2 bolts that hold this whole thing on. There's a couple of bolts here. There's one there. Same thing that look like the 3/8 inch sheet metal bolts. So we're going to disconnect the battery and we're going to pull those off and see if this thing does actually connect. But I kind of have a feeling you have to replace this whole thing. It looks like, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 breakers or something like that. So I definitely don't want to disconnect all of these wires, but I'm going to disconnect the ground from the battery and pull that off. And, well, I think I'll disconnect the ground and the positive from the battery. We'll pull that off and see. We'll be right back. And now it's loose from the bulkhead. And when we look at the back, we can see that sure enough, it's just a bunch of individual breakers here. There are 6 of them. I cannot see it on the video here, but I'm sure there's a number on there. But what it looks like is that the power distribution strip there, that copper strip, is bolted there on to each side of the to the side of all of 6 of the relays, and that's what's holding them all together in this one distribution center. So if we pull that nut right there that you're looking at loose, then it's going to release it from the power distribution node, and we should have that one breaker out of there so that we can fix it. Be right back. I'm going to get a hand tool for that because we don't want to use power tools on that. And just a tip here, if you get a little arcing like I did when I went to take off this nut for the connector here, it's probably because you've got your shore power connected and you're getting arc from your inverter. So make sure you don't have any DC to this. If I would have been a smart cookie, I would have gone ahead and tested that with an auto tester, but I didn't because I think I'm smarter than I am. But don't be afraid to look into this yourself. It's your stuff, and nobody's going to care for fixing it right more than you do. And there's a lot of resources out on YouTube. We'll be right back once we have that breaker off. Here's a close look at that relay. I'm imagining that this will Zoom in on it, you can see the plastic's broken and everything else. Now, they didn't do all of this. I did part of the damage when I tried to, when I noticed that it was because this was torqued too tight, and whenever I tried to loosen or tighten it down, I was getting mixed results. But one thing I did find is that when this hold down nut was loose on this one, it would work. So I backed off that hold down nut and I tried to put a second nut on there to sandwich the connection to see if that would help me out. And guess what? No, it didn't, because this broke. It was already, it had already been too tight and torqued down too hard, and it had had enough, so it just gave up. Which is probably a good thing, because I probably shouldn't trust it anyway that it was failing on me. So you can see it's a 30 amp 12 volt. And the good things about electrical on RV now is that a lot of this stuff you can just get from an auto parts store. I'm going to look it up and see if I can order it on Amazon, and that'll be another little segment on here. As we suspected, just loosening this last nut, since nothing was connected to this, loosening this last nut that held it to the power distribution bar, that copper strip, loosened it from the whole node distribution system, so we were able to just pull it right off. Put the nut back on there. We'll be right back. Okay, so here we are. We're at Amazon, and we found this Wintronics short stop circuit breaker. It's 30 amp, 12 volt. It uses the inline bracket type. I guess that's what the what I was calling a power distribution node that appeared to have this copper strip that hooked all these together. This looks like what we need, so we're going to add it to the cart. I know it says 40 amp down here, but that's wrong. It is a 30 amp breaker, and we'll have it all fixed. Well, okay, everybody, I guess that'll just about do it. Just want to take a minute to say I'm grateful to my viewers and subscribers, one and all. Thank you all very much for watching and supporting my channel. Don't forget to leave comments. And please like, subscribe, and share these videos. And don't forget to click on that bell icon so that you can be notified when I have new content out.